and they just will make you inside.
No, I was at
in Mexico, and he said no thanks.
no, I was at
Trump was made
just
a
now
Mason on
at
site.
Andreas's panel.
It's a landmark, it's an ancient thing, but I have to say to you
No.
that whoever did
Anything
that should be
Cecile does is really good.
tarred, feathered, whatever else they might want to suggest. You know, we run into in Washington, for example, on Friday, everyone wants to beat the Beltway traffic. And so we don't know what to do about Fridays. One of our conferences, which is on science and technology, we break for dinner and go back in a smaller venue. I get all these magazines on how to run a convention. Of course, most of the stuff, I am not about to have ladies jumping out of cakes.
That's a great
legacy. But
why would you run it on a Friday? Why wouldn't you run it on a Saturday?
we do run. But
I don't know. I've been at my
on the other hand, you have people
I've been
flying
at my
in,
institution for
and they've only got a day or 2 days. Hotels are so expensive.
So,
I know.
so I probably won't. But, you know, some of my students have gone on
So
to
we
get
spend all our time
So,
trying to
and in
think
fact,
about
one
how
of
to
my
make
first
it
students is
acceptable
now
to
back
people.
as a colleague of
Make it
mine,
work.
which is
Yeah.
really wonderful.
Well, what I do,
Yeah.
Go
It's
ahead.
like having a son.
Good.
Yeah.
And what about your son?
He's doing really well. He is doing really well, and my daughter too.
Okay, because we're having this pleasant conversation.
Well, we're not talking about anything else.
No.
We'll make it
No,
short.
he's doing
What
very
is
well.
the award
He's
we're
my
giving?
daughter.
Okay.
And how JRFF? You're very busy with that
We're
too?
very busy with that
She
too.
took over from me, you know, Susan, at JRFF.
Oh,
and,
no.
No, it's you. Well, Jeffrey took over.
Jeffrey,
from me.
Jeffrey and
But
I,
then,
and
Susan
yeah.
is helping. And, No, I'm only on the board now.
I see.
Nice and quiet.
It's nuts. It's nuts.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us on a late afternoon on a holiday. You all deserve a medal. Well, you all got a medal. So, the first order of business is the presentation of one of the high awards of the conference, and I'll ask Pierre Molière to confer the award.
Alors, comme vous le savez, notre conférence, tous les 2 ans, distribue 3 prix. Donc, 2 ont été annoncés, donc il reste le dernier prix. Et alors, nous avons récompensé un chercheur émérite qui produit depuis des dizaines d'années. Nous avons récompensé une revue qui, en 10 ans, a maintenant tout son public. Et puis, nous avons voulu récompenser aussi un jeune chercheur pour un travail novateur qui, on l'espère, en appellera beaucoup d'autres. Et donc, nous avons décerné le 3e prix de la conférence, le Kill Winning Awards, à Thomas Delassor pour son grand armorial des CBCS. Alors, c'est un livre magnifique et qui explore... Alors, oui, on va l'applaudir d'abord. Alors, nous, on ne voit rien ici, mais j'espère qu'il est dans la salle. Et je vais lui remettre ce diplôme dont toute la valeur est essentiellement symbolique, d'ailleurs. Félicitations. Tu peux peut-être dire un mot sur ta recherche?
Bien, bonjour à tous. Donc merci, grande surprise pour moi. Ce n'était pas prévu, je ne me serais même pas habillé comme ça sinon. Donc écoutez, merci beaucoup. Ça me fait très plaisir, effectivement, en tant que jeune chercheur, de pouvoir être récompensé pour mon livre que je viens juste de sortir. Donc effectivement, sur mes recherches, donc j'ai travaillé pendant 3 ans sur les archives maçonniques lyonnaises essentiellement, donc du régime écossais rectifié, pour pouvoir sortir un grand armorial qui répertorie plus de 150 fiches de francs-maçons du régime écossais rectifié du XVIIIe siècle et du début du XIXe. Voilà. Et j'ai essayé de reconstituer le plus grand nombre de biographies de ces frères-là pour pouvoir arriver à mettre en émergence plusieurs choses, notamment les interactions qu'ils avaient entre eux en dehors de la franc-maçonnerie, que ce soit au niveau professionnel, que ce soit au niveau divertissement, etc. Et ça sera sans doute la poursuite de mes travaux dans ce sens-là pour voir toutes ces interactions nombreuses qui existaient au niveau des villes, des urbanités. Voilà. Merci.
Thank you, Pierre. The next order of business is to thank the Museum of Freemasonry, the American Public University Systems, and the Bibliothèque nationale. And especially to say that it is extremely an honor to work with the Bibliothèque nationale and to be partnered with them. And we look forward to innovations and things that they may inspire us to do. I also want to particularly thank Daniel Gutierrez, the Executive Director of the Policy Studies Association. He gives medals, he does not get medals, but if we were to give medals, we would certainly give him a gold one. I'd like you to add your applause to Daniel. The next conference in Washington in May, among the themes are not intended to exclude other themes. They don't exclude. They merely are a suggestion. It will be on women's fraternal groups and gender. And that should attract some interest. In 2 years' time, here at the Bibliothèque nationale, we will, among other themes, discuss the persecution or hostility to fraternal groups like Freemasonry. And that is a very broad period. As you know, it would include the anti-Masonic parties in America, the Vichy, all kinds of things in Russia. Well, you know better than I that that is a very broad theme, but it should be interesting. We welcome your comments and your emails, and we do listen. And if you have some input, please be forward about it and tell us what you would like or what you think. We wish to produce 2 books on the conference. One will be on Ramsey from papers you've given. There were, after all, 17 papers related to Ramsey. And the other book will be a general book on Freemasonry. To get those books of your papers out, we need you to send us the corrected versions as soon as possible. We know you have heavy schedules, but we would welcome getting those manuscripts by the autumn and getting the book out to you. If you are in Washington, please let us be hospitable and take you to a meal and show you our building, which we're very proud of. I'm going to ask each of the people today to sum up, especially for me, the juxtaposition of Ramsey and Anderson, provided partly by Professor Summers' contribution, has been a revelation. Those of us who are maybe mistakenly involved in Anglo-Saxon Masonry don't know enough about Ramsey, and this has been a liberating thing. If I may say so, in the Anglo-Saxon world, Ramsay has been regarded somewhat as a buccaneer, soldier of fortune, and Anderson as a savant and scholar. And perhaps, like with all generalizations, that has been a simplification. And your papers have opened eyes. It has opened my view again to the universalism of the subject. We have had papers on Argentina, Brazil, on Iran, on India, on Haiti, on Italy and Libya. It clearly is a subject which, because of the work of Professor Jacob, Professor Stevenson, Professor Summer, Professor Prescott, and others, we now realize has been somewhat confined, and the conferences, in my view, are doing something to open the subject to a much wider view. It also has been appropriate that young people have presented, because the future lies with encouraging younger scholars, and that is very good. I think further work on Ramsay will be very rewarding, and there is more to understand about him. I've talked to Ellen Bauer, who's a great friend of the conference, sometimes about the need to involve more of the scholars who are working on orders, such as the Legion d'Honneur and the Order of the Garter and others, because Ramsay's involvement in chivalric orders remains under-researched. There's more I could say. For me, it has been a very liberating education to hear what you have had to say on the subject. I'll now turn to Professor Jacob.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Paul, for organizing this wonderful conference, and thank you all for coming to it. I want to make some general remarks about how I think the historian of intellectual life should or would approach Ramsay. And the place to begin, in my mind, is in the work, with the work of a remarkable French literary historian called Paul Hazard. The Crise de la Conscience Européenne appeared in 1935 and is still in print and is still used. It's translated into English as simply the European mind. And we still teach it, because what Hazard did, by reading texts carefully and closely, was to identify an intellectual and moral crisis that begins in Europe in the 1680s under the impact of French absolutism and the reappearance of Catholic absolutism in England. In the summer of 1685, the revocation of the Edict Nantes here in France, and James II coming to the throne in England, sent a shockwave throughout, particularly Protestant Europe, signaling that it seemed as if Europe was going to go back into the dark ages of the 30 Years' War, of religious upheaval. And you can see the shockwave operating in all sorts of complicated ways. Someone like Isaac Newton, you can see his concern for the millennium and the end of the world peak in 1685, come back again in his writing in 1688, 89. In the same period, he becomes an anti-Trinitarian Protestant. He's also a practicing alchemist. So here you have in the same mind a brilliant physicist and mathematician who's also a religious heretic and who is terrified about what is going to happen in England with this new Catholic king. Some of his closest friends are involved in the Protestant diaspora that spreads throughout Northern and Western Europe as a result of the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. And this is something that preoccupied him through the last few decades of his life. He dies in 1727. Similarly, if you find someone like Isaac Newton going into a kind of spiritual and intellectual crisis about how to find a way through this darkness, it's also more the case even with younger men. I'm thinking of someone like John Toland, who is born in 1670, who emerges out of extreme Protestant background and makes his way within a decade, first to free thinking and then to pantheism. Indeed, he invented the word pantheism. Ramsay belongs in that spiritual struggle. He comes out of it looking very different from the French philosophes, from Montesquieu and Voltaire and Diderot, and looking very different from John Locke or John Toland. Ramsay takes a direction toward Catholicism, a rather extreme form of Catholicism, but he also is a seeker in the sense that he's willing to embrace something like Freemasonry. Indeed, out of this Hazar's crisis, one would be surprised that something like Freemasonry did not happen. Because what is Freemasonry saying about religion? That we are to accept the religion in which all men agree. Now, we all know there is no such thing. Similarly, the attempt to arrive at some kind of spiritual brotherhood is very much in keeping with what Ramsay will search for all his life. He comes up with answers that are essentially pro-absolutist, pro-Catholic, and in that sense he becomes a distinct minority report. His future is not the future that Europe takes. But he's still, nevertheless, an interesting figure, and therefore one well worth studying in this larger philosophical context laid out by Hazar. This crisis of the European mind, out of which comes the Enlightenment. Ramsay, for all of his desire to find a cosmopolitan world, to find a way forward that is unifying, to create a spiritual nation, Ramsay remains deeply religious, deeply devout, and thus he is not in any sense a philosophe.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Paul, for this wonderful conference. Thank you to Pierre as well, who I think helped a lot. And it was really a great pleasure to hear all those I could hear, because of course we had 3 workshops running at the same time, so we couldn't listen, unfortunately, to everybody. Now, I would like to discuss with dear James Anderson a little, because Susan has made indeed a wonderful job, I think, and I'm totally convinced by her findings, and as well as Andrew Prescott's findings concerning 1717 and the fact that probably this meeting never took place, and we have to wait till 1721 to find this Grand Lodge of England. So anyway, the piece of good news is that we have to celebrate again in 4 years' time, right? That's something. But anyway, I don't think this totally changes the whole picture. Because James Anderson might have been what I would call a fibber, let's say a fibber, right? Not a real liar, a fibber, I'd say. Yes, he told a small lie about 1717 for the reasons that Susan explained so well this morning. Yet, I think what is really important is not the figure of James Anderson, but what he represents. And also the fact that probably he was not alone to write those constitutions. We know that. We know that probably Desaguliers was really instrumental in writing them, or at least inspired them. And as Margaret has just told us, now he was a Huguenot, and there was this Huguenot component after the repeal of the Edict of Nantes, and that was very important. So those people who set up the first Grand Lodge were tolerant people. They wanted to promote the idea of religious and political tolerance. Now, they could only do that because there had been the 1688 Glorious Revolution. And the Glorious Revolution was not important as such, but what was important was the Bill of Rights, which immediately followed that revolution. And the Bill of Rights actually put an end to divine right monarchy, and really was the beginning of parliamentary monarchy. So that's very different. And of course, those were this was the source of inspiration later on of the Hanoverians as opposed to the Stuarts. So this is where, of course, I'm coming to Ramsay, because dear Ramsay was a Jacobite at heart. So I know maybe he was a bit of a turncoat. You know, if Anderson was a fibber, he was a bit of a turncoat, because he actually tried to please the Hanoverians, didn't he? And he came back, and when he went back to Britain, probably had a mind to, to be reconciliated with those Hanoverians. He was a Catholic. He converted himself to Catholicism. He was a friend of Fénelon, and also he was also a friend of Madame Guyon, yes, and he was influenced by Pietism. But all this doesn't bring him very near to the Enlightenment, according to me, because, well, I know he was tolerant, so that was the good point. He believed, I think, in religious tolerance. I'm not going to say anything against that. But you see, when he supported the Jacobites, I think we should not idealize the Jacobites, as a lot of people tend to do in France. We tend to idealize the Jacobites. But the Jacobites simply supported the idea of divine right monarchy, of absolute monarchy. So this was not particularly enlightened. So indeed, this is how I would conclude. I would not like all of a sudden to idealize Chevalier Ramsay, although I'm glad indeed we explored his ideas, because the two discourses are indeed fundamental, and they are fundamental texts. But I'm not too surprised when I see that Bernard E. Jones, who is a respected historian, even though he wrote his books now quite a few years ago, actually was very wary of Ramsay. He spoke of him as the lively, fertile mind of the French Mason. So he had his doubts about him, and just, of course, as I think, you might have discussed that, but it was Dr. Oliver's theory that he had actually fabricated the Royal Arch degree, but now Dr. Oliver has become very suspicious as not really a respected historian, has he? So anyway, I think we should not idealize him. And I would really trust Anderson personally better than Ramsay as far as Enlightenment values are concerned. Thank you.
Is it my turn? Okay. Well, I didn't know I was going to be doing this today, so my thoughts are going to be sort of sketchy. One of the things that I have learned by working on the apple tree and working on James Anderson, and more broadly working on Masonic history, is that there is a good deal to be learned and revealed by going back to the primary sources. And in part, this is because we have new analytical tools and new databases, and new documents, new old documents have made their way into the archives, and everything really deserves a fresh look, because when we give it a fresh look, we frequently find new and surprising stories. One of the stories that we have found about Anderson, and that indeed is available for all sorts of figures, is his life outside of Freemasonry. This morning I described him as many things, and I think we need to understand the many aspects of individuals that we're looking at in Masonic history. Because the more light we can shine on the individual as a whole person, the more it tells us about the broader context within which Freemasonry interacted with other aspects of society, and that's critical to understanding. Another thing that I have discovered about Ramsay just today, because he's not someone I have thought about very much, is that he and Anderson have more in common in many ways than you would think. They are both active participants in the Republic of Letters. They're both multilingual. They both write very, very interesting things outside of Masonic writings. And they both participate in conversations that cross physical borders and borders of religion. They both engage with questions of religious tolerance. And so I think if Ramsay is more complicated than we have thought, Anderson certainly is as well. The place that I want to leave us with is libraries. One of the wonderful things that I've been exposed to in my study of Freemasonry, not only with James Anderson, but at the other end of the 18th century with Ebenezer Sibley that I'm working on, is looking at what they owned, looking at what they copied and what they read and what their sources were, looking at book catalogs. Because if we want to get inside their minds and understand what they meant by, for example, the religion in which all men agree, we need to read what they read, and we need to have a better understanding of what elements go into informing what they're talking about. Because we're likely to come to the wrong conclusions, or at least anachronistic conclusions, if we just take the words at face value. I think that's it. Thank you.
Alors, nous avons consacré une large partie de ce colloque à la question de Ramsay. Une chose qui me frappe, c'est que finalement, selon des modalités très diverses, Anderson apparaît comme une sorte de père fondateur de la maçonnerie britannique, ou en tout cas de symbole de ses débuts avec ses constitutions. Ramsay, lui, propose le premier grand texte de la maçonnerie française. Et ce qu'il y a de singulier, c'est que Ramsay est totalement ignoré dans le domaine anglo-saxon au XVIIIe siècle, et à l'inverse, Anderson est complètement ignoré en France et probablement sur le continent européen au XVIIIe siècle. Donc c'est assez curieux, et on pourrait même se demander si les différences entre ces maçonneries anglo-saxonnes et françaises et latines ne remontent pas finalement à ces deux pères fondateurs, puisqu'il faut le rappeler, le discours de Ramsay, c'est un peu le programme intellectuel de la maçonnerie française. alors, il y a bien sûr la question de la chevalerie, on le cite souvent pour la chevalerie, mais il y a bien autre chose. Il y a la dimension initiatique que doit avoir la franc-maçonnerie. Il y a la dimension humaniste, un intérêt pour les questions du monde, l'idée de faire une encyclopédie des connaissances. Et finalement, la franc-maçonnerie française, elle est restée au XVIIIe, au XIXe et jusqu'à aujourd'hui assez fidèle à cette double approche humaniste et initiatique. Alors, le problème auquel nous nous sommes heurtés, c'est bien sûr pour un historien le problème des sources, et il faut bien le dire qu'il n'y a pas vraiment de sources nouvelles sur Ramsay. On connaît à peu près tous ses textes, on connaît à peu près sa vie, et donc le parti pris que nous avons choisi dans ces journées, c'est d'étudier son contexte intellectuel, ses sources, et notamment dans la dernière partie de la conférence, il est apparu à quel point le discours de Ramsay devait être restitué dans sa pensée, et notamment dans sa pensée théologique et toute son aventure spirituelle avec le quiétisme. Et donc les mots et les phrases qui sont utilisés dans le discours de Ramsay prennent une signification particulière quand, par une sorte d'effet de transparence, on voit derrière ces autres textes et toute cette pratique du quiétisme du XVIIIe siècle. Alors, un peu comme Anderson, et c'est un point commun, Ramsay est un personnage ambigu, un peu insaisissable, on ne sait pas ses véritables idées, il semble avoir un peu évolué, mais finalement, il ouvre par toutes ces ambiguïtés entre une approche assez classique. Alors effectivement, il est stuartiste, donc a priori, comme l'a rappelé Cécile, les stuartistes, alors qu'ils sont populaires parce que ce sont les vaincus et qu'il y a un côté romantique, notamment dans la dernière épopée de Bonnie Prince Charlie, mais effectivement, on ne peut pas dire qu'ils représentent les Lumières et les idées en évolution au XVIIIe siècle. Mais Ramsay, lui, parce qu'il a ce parcours religieux très particulier, eh bien finalement, il prône la tolérance, puisque, par exemple, dans le milieu religieux où il est totalement indifférent d'être protestant et catholique, et même ses amis lui font reproche de s'être converti au catholicisme. Il aurait très bien pu rester protestant auprès de Fénelon et de Madame Guyon. Donc là, il y a quand même une tolérance religieuse qui est assez extraordinaire. Alors, au-delà de Ramsay, je crois que l'apport de ce colloque, et il faut en remercier nos amis de PSO, c'est cette confrontation, ce compagnonnage de 2 jours entre des historiens français et des historiens venant du monde entier. Et je crois qu'en cela, c'est une manifestation unique, puisque il me semble que c'est le seul lieu où il y a cette rencontre entre des représentants de l'histoire maçonnique des États-Unis, d'Angleterre, d'Amérique du Sud. Et là encore, ce qui est frappant, c'est qu'il y a bien sûr des différences, mais par exemple, et ça peut être un enseignement pour nos amis britanniques, il y a aussi beaucoup de similitudes, par exemple, entre l'histoire maçonnique française ou latine et l'histoire maçonnique sud-américaine. Donc, on voit que l'histoire maçonnique est un phénomène global et qu'il y a eu des échanges, des influences réciproques. Voilà. Écoutez, et puis il faut faire 2 remerciements. Un remerciement à la Bibliothèque nationale qui continue à nous héberger, alors qu'on est un sujet qui en France est encore souvent considéré comme sulfureux, et on a eu des réactions à la banque d'accueil parfois, enfin pas hostiles, mais surprises. Alors c'est le premier remerciement qu'il faut faire. Et puis le deuxième remerciement qu'il faut faire, c'est à vous qui avez renoncé au soleil, aux vacances traditionnelles de ce long week-end de 4 jours pour vous vouer aux austères travaux de l'érudition maçonnique.
Thank you very much. And I feel right now that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here next to me. And first, when Paul invited me to be part of this panel, I asked him, what do I have to say about Ramsay? If my area of research doesn't have anything to do with Ramsay of French Freemasonry. But after the workshop, and after thinking about as Peter says, the global nature of Freemasonry and the universality of Freemasonry, it is important to try to connect and listen to the voices of different discourses and expertise of this topic in order to come up with a better and more comprehensive history. And particularly when there are the voices from those who study the global South, or the former colonies, or those that don't tell the story because they are not the winners. It's the vision of the vanquished, right? So it's those of us who have this perspective. So I actually was very happy that Pierre, this past Wednesday, invited experts on Ramsay, and we learned about experts on literature, on the biography, and so on and so forth. So we were able to understand, and some of the things that I took from that workshop is that we need to avoid Ramsayphilia, but also a Ramsayphobia. The same with Anderson. And also it's not Anderson versus Ramsay, or it's not who came first or who said it better. It is about what are the documents saying to us, what is the evidence that we have before us, and how are we going to problematize that evidence to come up with serious and sound research and papers. That's something that I learned, and I think that's very important. And the keynote speaker this morning, and the Professor Summers with telling us about that we were wrong about 1717. That's important, and also from that, I mentioned it in the workshop that I was thinking about the Mexican historian Edmundo O'Gorman that talks about not the discovery of America or the Americas, but the idea and the narrative that America was discovered. That's what is important, because you will always have America Vespucci came first, or the Vikings, but we need to face a reality, a colonial and hegemonic reality that is imposed upon us, that is 12th of October 1492. And from there, we need to begin our discussions, either the constructed or a study from the perspective that we do. So I think this is the idea that the first Grand Lodge was in 1717, and we are discussing that idea, but I think we need to correct our mistakes. And I think in the historians of Freemasonry, scholars of Freemasonry, need to start forgetting about this search of authenticity. The authentic doesn't exist. Of course, the narratives of nation states, they bring these stories, these foundational fictions that are really important to create nationalism and nationality and identity, but the authentic doesn't exist. What it matters are the historiographies and the histories that the documents prove to us. So those were things that I learned from that. And in addition, something that my colleague Maru Vasquez reminded us during that discussion, that was something that Paul and I published like a decade ago, and in my first book published in 2009 about Mexican Freemasonry, I said that is what we need to think about Freemasonries or Masonries rather than one Freemasonry. I know that to some of you that might be extremely problematic, but for us who study Freemasonries in different parts of the world, we see the hybridity. And if you attended the papers during this conference, I just want to name a few. You know, the alternative modernity of voodoo and Freemasonry in Haiti, or some of the influence of Freemasonry in the architecture of Iran, or some of the colonial Freemasonry in Morocco, and I can name and also Freemasonry. I mean the letters of Goya. That maybe we don't have the documents, but we have the material history and the material culture that is also very important. So this is basically what I wanted to say, and invite, as my other colleagues, all of you to think and continue this discussion. And of course, as one of the organizers of the conference, I want to take this opportunity to thank you and thank all the participants for making us think about the future of the field. Freemasonry is a field of study, and many of us, particularly those of us who need to deal with tenure and promotion, and I'm sure that many of you in other countries also have to convince your colleagues, your provosts, your deans, what is Freemasonry? What is relevant about Freemasonry? And that is why I was really happy to see that the scholars of Freemasonry today and at this conference and others that are happening these years are linking, for example, Freemasonry with the discussions of modernity, with the discussions of Reformation, with other themes that don't need an explanation. But I think we need to be really on your face and talk about the relevance of our study and our field, and going back to Ramsey, and also rescue important figures. I don't think we should canonize them because they don't deserve that canonization, but they deserve the proper research that perhaps have been neglected because of politics and also differences and competition between empires and coloniality, the coloniality of power. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
A private joke pour les Français. Vous avez compris que c'est Anderson, en même temps, Ramsay.
We hope you will join us now for a farewell toast.
President of the Republic says always, en même temps, it's equality, en même temps, liberty, it's social progress, en même temps, efficiency, and so people call it Mr. En même temps.